Just a quick announcement before we get started. Please go upstairs before they leave and check out the vendor room. There's a lot of secret sauces in there that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Today's panel is the secret sauce of festivals, behind the scenes and operations and basically putting out fires. So let's get right to it. Our moderator is Austin Whitney.
Hello, everyone. My name is Austin Whitney, and we are here to talk about how to make the magic. You know, we've at FestForums, we've had an opportunity to hear, all about different elements of festival design and everything that goes onto the back end. But I think, as everybody here knows who produces events, that without operations and production success, nothing is going to matter. And today, I happen to be joined by a group of amazing event producers from around the world to talk about all of their successful strategies that they've seen to make their events productions and operations be successful. So before we get started, I'm going to turn it over to our panel's sponsor, Tim.
Thanks, Austin. Welcome, everyone. Good to see everyone here. What I would quick blurb before we go into the panel here, which will be exciting discussion, is part of what our company is, ADA Lift Rentals of America, is to provide a service that will help elevate your event, but also deal with a very critical need at all these events. As everyone just heard, I think the statistic is 1 in every 4 Americans has a disability, and it's on all of us in our production of an event to make sure that we're providing a solution for all fans. So we've been around for over a decade, providing wheelchair lift rentals to major events, Formula One, all the PGA, a lot of music festivals, the Jazz Festival in New Orleans, as well as Tortuga, Lollapalooza, and we're a full service provider. So we have experts that travel around the country, make sure that the structures are set up for ADA compliance, providing lifts for those, on-site staff as well. You all have enough headaches dealing with an event. You don't need to deal with the worry or concern around a lift. So that's what we're there for. Last year we did 150 events all over the country. We have warehouses all over the country and full-time staff. So these are our people, our experts, to help make sure we provide a service for you so that your events can go off without a hitch there. So looking forward to a great discussion here with everyone, and I'll pass it back to Austin.
Cool. So, my name is Austin Whitney. I'm the founder of a company called 1050 Entertainment, and we consult on most of the top 100 music festivals by revenue on ADA compliance. And separately, I run a locker rental company that works on about 40 music festivals a year. I want to take a moment to introduce our wonderful panel here. First, we got Mike Ziemer, who runs Third String Entertainment, and his most recent projects were So What Festival in Texas, as well as where we work together over at Furnace Festival. So I want to say welcome to Mike. Our next panelist will be Michelle, who runs Fast Forward Entertainment. She spends most of her time on the San Diego Wine and Food Festival, as well as leading B2B events, primarily in the food and beverage space. Jose runs Ascending 7 Productions, between Outside Lands, Bottle Rock, Life is Beautiful. Those take up, I assume, all your time in life. And has his background in the X Games. EJ is the president and COO for Festival Productions, Inc., and spends her time on New Orleans Jazz Festival. And then we have Amaya, who runs Artistas Creativos and is a leading international event producer, having worked in 14 different countries recently, and spending time working on the Whalers' most recent tours. So that is our panel of experts, and what we really want to get into is their experiences, so everybody can learn from them on how to produce, the most successful events possible. So, in discussing production operation with all of you, we all agreed that being adaptive is the most critical attribute for success on site. I want to ask about the largest operational challenge that you all have experienced on your events. Jose, can I start with you?
Absolutely. Well, as we all know, after COVID, I'm sure everyone ran into a lot of the same problems with supply chain and costs going up. For me specifically, I definitely had to deal with shortages from our biggest providers out there in the industry, from all the biggest players. Didn't matter who it was, whether it was Sunbelt, United, National, United, Site Services as well. And so for us, what we experienced was having to hodgepodge equipment. No matter what, my order was, I always had to outsource X amount of carts, X amount of forklifts, X amount of something that I would normally be able to get from one provider, two providers, out to 3 or 4 providers to make it all happen. And obviously that was a huge undertaking after COVID. And we had to get very creative with making sure that we had the equipment, especially because when we came back, everything got pushed together. So where I had Bottle Rock and a couple of months in between, then I go to Outside Lands, and then I had a little bit of time to go to Life is Beautiful. Subsequently, everything got pushed. So it was Bottle Rock, and then I had Life is Beautiful, and then we had Outside Lands, but they were all overlapping. So that was the other part of the dilemma, was how to subsequently be at all these places with the same crew at the same time. And so we had to get really creative with planning, and that's where being more of a proactive planner, which we'll touch about later, really came into play. And being really creative with keeping X amount of the team at one location, sending the other one to start the production, bouncing back and forth between the two, and then subsequently just leapfrogging teams around, and also having to use personnel that I might have not used at other times, because beggars can't be choosers when you need people to fill in those spots. And even though they weren't maybe the top tier that I would have chosen, you had to work with what you had. And so that presented a challenge on its own, because you have a certain dynamic with your core team where you have your unspoken language, and you all know your flows, you all know how you work together. So bringing in other people that aren't quite on that same caliber, made things interesting all in the same. So those are some of the major hurdles that I personally dealt with after COVID, and things have definitely stabilized in a lot of ways, but some of the challenges still continue.
Michelle, would you mind talking about some of the challenges you faced and successful strategies you found to overcome those?
So right after the pandemic, there was an organization that formed in San Diego in particular. It's the San Diego Events Coalition. I don't know if any of the cities that you guys produce in did anything similar, but for us, it became a lobbying initiative to try to get our county and public health officials and our local government to understand that we could effectively go back and reopen our businesses, and that what we all did were actually professionally run events, which sometimes, we have to convince our officials that we know what we're doing. But what we found through that, and what the success was, is that by unifying our voices, now we can consistently go back out to those officials when we're being faced or met with another challenge. What we continue to find is that we're seeing fees continuously increase. So our fire, our street closures, police, permitting, health, rigging structures, like we're over-regulated and permit heavy. And I think that one of the obstacles we've had to overcome is the continued education of our officials and understanding what the implication will be when those fees continue to grow. Festivals, like a lot of people on the panel and you on the room, are going to assess whether or not you're going to go into that city and produce those events. So as operators, it's become tremendously more difficult to do that. The other thing for us too is, we post-pandemic have gone into multi-site locations. During our 1-week festival, we're in multiple locations at one time. We're running about 30 or so events inside of 1 week. And so we've had to kind of evolve in having multiple crews in dual locations, and really letting go of a lot to be able to trust and onboard a whole different production team to be able to make sure that everything in a multi-site location is being erected the way we want it to.
Gotcha. And these topics, both of the economics that we're all dealing with, as well as delegating out to your teams and to your partners, something we're going to touch on a little bit more later. EJ, would you mind talking about some of the challenges and successes that you've seen?
Sure. So I would say that the largest challenge that we faced quite recently, last year, was going cashless. So we're talking about a 53-year-old festival that's making a big decision to go cashless. So, I mean, the first thing is you have to think, is it a good idea to make such a big leap and to agree to do that type of hurdling right after COVID? It's a great big investment, right? So we had to think about the amount of money we'd have to invest. It would take a lot of bandwidth from our team just coming out of producing after the COVID year, or right after that COVID year. And you have to have buy-in. So we had to start very early to push that forward. So that meant, we start producing our festival with our core team coming on board in September. So in September, and the festival's in April, we had to start preparing the way, right? So we had to start having all of those integral meetings. We had to start thinking about, did we have enough internet connectivity? Were we going to be able to have all of the different locations? Because Jazz Fest, with 13 stages and a myriad of activities, we're spread out among that entire racetrack, right? So we have the grandstand, we have all of these tiny areas where we had food and beverage, we have sponsor hospitality areas. So there's so many nooks and crannies that you have to look for if you're going to do that. So I can tell you, our staff was scared from the very beginning. It's hard to change, especially after 50 plus years. But we kept hearing that cashless was the way to go. You're going to see a major revenue increase if you do it. But we had to go through explaining that first to our staff, to our directors. We had to get buy-in there. Then the challenge was going to our vendors, because the food vendors, we have 60 plus food vendors, they were very resistant. We actually had one or two that pulled out because they said that they could not see the future in that way. They didn't feel that they were going to be profitable. Of course, they're with us this year because they realized that that wasn't the best decision to make. But it was a challenge. We had so many meetings. We actually created website portals where we had to walk them through how to do this. And then it was coming on the time pre-event, right? So that first day was horrific. We had Lizzo that day, and it was packed. It was so packed that the food vendors, I'm using them as an example, they didn't expect the crowd. Some of them didn't have inventory to last because they didn't realize that cashless is actually a faster transactional exchange than dollar bills, right? So they were like, my gosh, we're running out of food. And we had connectivity issues. So that night, we had to pull everybody on board, our IT people, our directors. We had to have meetings. We had to think about how to make it better. And believe me, the next day, it was so much better. So we were able to overcome that, but I would say it was because of communicating, constantly communicating with every level of our teams.
Gotcha. Thank you, EJ. I do want to talk about the economics here, because I think that is a challenge that we all face in our line of work. I'm curious about how the economics have affected production budgets lately, and are you guys seeing cost stabilizing finally? And what is your forecast in terms of economic projections for this year? How is that looking, as well as strategies that you guys have successfully used to navigate the current environment? Mike, I would love to hear your perspective on this.
Okay. So when we first came back, we had two very polar opposite experiences. We had Furnace Fest, which came back in fall of 2021. Half the people didn't want us to do the festival. The other half didn't care. We did it, and we had an overwhelming amount of people that wanted to come back to work, wanted to do live events. All the staging companies were giving us great quotes. Everything was awesome. All the security showed up. And then we did So What Music Festival, which was Memorial Day weekend 2022, which was the peak of, I think, like stock market going back down, crypto crashing, all the labor shortages, everything like that. So all of our quotes were like 3 times what Furnace Fest was all of a sudden. And we knew we were going to lose money even if we sold out the event. Getting trucking to bring in TerraPlast for the field, all of those things. So that year we had like 7 stages trying to go, we've been gone for a few years, let's go as big as possible. And, after realizing that this is something that isn't going anywhere, like things are still going to cost a lot, it's going to be tricky getting staging out, there's more festivals and events than ever popping up, we decided that we would just scale down. So we now have 3 stages, we do more quality over quantity, and despite 20 years of experience thinking that all I needed to do to make a festival successful was pile on as many artists as possible. Last year, we sold more tickets than we've ever sold to our festival, which has been around for 15 years. And this year, we're on track to beat that. So our model of scaling down and making sure that we're focusing more on the fan experience, limiting all of the staging production to just really simple, cutting down 2 days instead of 3. And this year we're actually sharing production and resources with 2 other festivals. There's a Tacos and Tequila Festival one weekend, LBW, which is a Disco Donnie Festival one weekend, and then ours the third weekend to even more so change our bottom line.
Jose, what are you seeing in terms of economics right now, and strategies that you've used, particularly with vendors?
Well, I mean, it was brutal after COVID. We saw a 40% increase across the board on almost everything, even from the biggest providers out there. Heavy equipment wasn't as drastic, but like fencing, bathrooms, comfort stations, it was a brutal increase. And so we had to navigate through that, obviously. We thought, okay, well, we're back. It shouldn't be too bad. And then the following year, we're looking at another 35% increase on top of that 40. So like if things were going to keep tracking that way, obviously that's not a sustainable model for us to be able to actually, make money. And so what we had to do is we literally had to go back and, mind you, I've had a relationship with a lot of these vendors for 20 plus years. So even though I work with them at, Bottle Rock, we've worked together at Electric Forest, at Bonnaroo, at Hangout, at Tortuga, Tomorrow World, on down the line. And I had to get to the point where I had to talk to the reps and we had to talk to the regional managers and their bosses and just be like, look, if we have to piece this together from 20 different little companies, that's where I'm at this point. Because what you guys are doing is not sustainable. And we understand that there's increases and everyone had to adjust. But, there was companies that I know had to make the adjustment because they took a hit. And other companies that were like, oh, well, they went up 45%, we can do it as well. Even though they didn't necessarily need to make that increase due to what they experienced or didn't. And that was just a trend. Everyone was like, well, if they're going to mark up 45%, we're going to mark up. We're just leaving money on the table. And that mentality kind of, spread fire throughout the industry for most vendors. And you kind of had to have a coming to Jesus with them to like, look, I know, especially for bigger providers that think, or, that are like the only game in town. We know there's only certain players that can provide trailers and containers for us nationally. The bathrooms, the plastics, the fencing, I mean, we all know, we all go to the same people. They all know that. But what they had to realize that if they keep forcing us down that road, we could get creative. And if as much of a pain in the butt as it would be to parlay between different vendors to get the assets that we need, that's where we were, because those increases weren't going to be sustainable. And we had those conversations and we were able to negotiate a much more reasonable, year over year increase. And then once we got those agreements, it was like, okay, well, let's lock this down for 3 to 5 years. And then that's been the strategy for keeping the cost at a, acceptable rate, is getting those increases down.
Are you seeing the costs stabilize for 2024?
It's stabilizing because we had to fight for it. If we wouldn't have fought for it and basically said, we'll go somewhere else if we had to, I don't know if they would have, out of just their good faith, So you definitely had to just kind of let them know where you were and what the strategy would be if that wasn't, and that it was viable, that we could piece it together from smaller vendors and they would lose the business. So,
Gotcha. Tim, as a vendor, are you seeing cost stabilizing on your front this year?
We've seen the cost stabilize. I mean, our largest cost is related to logistics. So fuel costs have continued to go up, or maybe the new normal. I think that's the big thing too, is just to Jose's point, communication with your partners. We've had a lot of people come to us last minute because ADA lifts sometimes are that last minute thought of, oh crap, I forgot about this. This isn't in my budget. What can we do? So I think a lot of that is just the planning, but I would say we've seen some stabilization. It's just a new normal that I don't think any of us thought was going to be the new normal.
Michelle, do you think you could talk a little bit about overseeing an ops budget? Dealing with all of the fluctuations in costs in the last couple of years, and having to be the decision maker when your ops team comes to you and says, "I need this for my operations budget." How you analyze those type of requests?
Well, I have to be careful about how I say it because they're sitting right here. So watch my words. We actually were talking about this a little bit this morning, and I think I think that we have to trust our teams and provide them with parameters with which to go and run and execute on the vision that we have. I think we work really closely with them to have them help evaluate. We were talking today about want versus need. When they're coming to us and saying, this is an unbudgeted expense and we're evaluating it, we have to materially ask ourselves, like, is it related to safety and security or guest experience or, an operational lift that if we don't have it, we don't produce, versus is it aesthetic? Does it add value? I'm usually on the other side, more of the dreamer in our world. And so our ops team is oftentimes also reciprocally pushing back, because as an owner, I'll come to them and say, I have an idea. And they're like, oh my God, here she goes again. Now what do we have to go create? So I think it's a healthy balance between looking at your production strategically, but then also on the operational level, providing a budget, giving parameters, but also realizing too, and this is again something we train our teams on, that budgets are not static; they're dynamic and they fluctuate, based on income and revenue and contingencies, and so it's an ongoing dialogue that we consistently have with our teams. It's not you set a budget and hopefully, oh my God, I hope everybody's doing budgets, but it's not that you set a budget and then you forget it until the event and go, well, how did we do? We have to be having the conversations consistently.
And Amai, I would love your perspective from an international perspective on both, the financials, what you've been seeing on the international market in the post-pandemic world, as well as how international producers have been responding to the economic challenges of the last couple of years.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, for international, it was brutal, because no other country outside the U.S. received any sort of grants or COVID assistance, So I saw a lot of promoters just didn't survive. It was sad, really rough in every way you can possibly imagine. Afterwards now, everything has rebounded. And one of the biggest issues we've had is just finding that date at the venue, because in Latin America, we just don't have that many venues to go, So just getting your date has been a war, we have promoters, blocking out dates a year in advance, even if they don't even have anything for that date yet, and then you have to negotiate with them and all that stuff. So it's been really tough in that area. A lot of weird law changes all over the place. We had a situation with one of the Wailers guitarists arrived into Costa Rica. This was December 2020, and he, the person that in immigration said, "Oh, you don't have any pages in your passport," turned him around, and within an hour, he was on a flight back. We didn't even have time to get, our lawyer in the airport. It was so fast, the turnaround, and luckily in that particular tour, we had Julian Marley, so he had a guitarist. So, but it was, things are changing so quick. Laws and the way they're being interpreted in each country, visas, that has gotten a little bit easier because now a lot of it is electronic, but it's still real challenges. Now, production-wise, things are okay, because I think the providers down there are, they have a lot of business, but also promoters will definitely push back, and in some cases will bring in a sound company from another country if necessary, So that's more or less where we're at,
In order to be successful, it's essential to manage and communicate complex logistics between different partners and different vendors. Each of you have vendors with sub operations, which you guys are ultimately responsible for. I wanted to ask what strategies, communication strategies, or strategies working with partners, you guys have learned to be successful with this. And EJ, I would love to turn that over to you.
So I think that the top thing that we've all been saying, and that's great, is it's communication. We have got to constantly, you can't communicate enough, not only to your staff, not only to your vendors, making sure that there's bottom-up communication and not just top-down, and understanding that the executive or the leadership team, they can't make decisions without involving their different tiers of staff. And if they try to do that, they'll really end up with a lot of pushback and not a lot of buy-in. And we found that giving voice to all of our departments, all of the levels of our departmental teams, even our volunteers, and I say even our volunteers because they come on closer to the event, but we reach out to them early, let them know what's going on. So we develop these focus groups, if you will, whether we're having internal focus groups, whether we're having focus groups with our vendors, because if I use the example again of cashless, when we had that first day, that scare and that horror, well, you can imagine how trust began to be a little tense with everyone. So I had the group that night, that night that we had to get together and figure out what to do. And I said, okay, I want to identify 10 vendors, and I'd like a team of people to go to those vendors every day, preferably twice a day, and check in. How are you doing? How's it going? What's the problem? Is it the line? Is it the point of service? What is it that we need to work on? And we did that faithfully every day. When we got to the last day, I'm thinking of a particular vendor because I did it as well. I mean, again, it's not just your team. The executive team has to roll up their sleeves and they have to be involved. So I went into it as well. And when I got to that last day to one of our very successful vendors and I said, how's it? He's like, okay, EJ, it's great. It's going great. Y'all keep coming to me. You keep asking me. We're good. I was like, okay. We just want to make sure that we're hearing your voice now, so I'm not hearing it when the festival's over.
Thanks, EJ. I wanted to ask each of you, as leaders, what advice might you have for someone new in this room who's producing one of their first events, or advice that you wish you would have known 10 years ago that would have been helpful? Mike, I would love to start with you.
So for me, I do mid-level festivals. All of them are based around a specific genre, whether we start in like the 1,500 cap or all the way up to 10,000. We have kind of come to terms with owning the middle ground. Like we aren't going to try to be that huge festival. We're never going to compete with Coachella. Life is beautiful. Sometimes the best thing that you can do as an event producer is build a strong community around your event and have those consistent 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 people supporting you. And in a lot of cases, you can make more money and have a more successful event at that level than trying to go higher. And sometimes just simplifying your event and saying, like, let's have 2 stages or 3 stages and go one day and then build it from there. Like, if you have all the money in the world, you can lose it very quickly just trying to compete with those big people instead of just like, this is the mid ground, I want to be right here. For us, it's rock festivals mostly. We also do a hip hop festival, but for you, it could be country or food and wine or whatever. Like, just owning that simple, short and simple area.
Michelle, I'd love to know what advice you have for the group.
Yeah, a couple things. I think the first thing is protect your IP. You know, we've been at this now 20 years. We just celebrated, we're going into our 20th year with the San Diego Bay Wine and Food Festival. And, you know, it's hard to have that kind of longevity. And people will see the good things that you're doing. And imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? You know, there's a lot of competition in the space, but to as much as you can, if you're getting started and you've got an idea, you know, start with your IP, you know, trademark and protect what you can and copyright what you can, so that way what you originate can stay yours as much as possible. The other thing I was going to say is, you know, embrace technology as much as you can and automate what you can. There's a lot that helps our team operationally, and in fact, I'm going to probably butcher this a little bit, but I think that this is so innovative that our team is doing in the year ahead. Kristen on our team has set up Glide app. I don't know if anybody's using Glide app, but I'm really curious as to know how this is going to perform for us. It's Chat GPT-4 enabled, and it's going to be for our operations and logistics teams, and it will have a vendor capability in it to where you can go in and put in, give me a search term, Kristen. Yeah, booth number is so-and-so, and it'll pop up the booth number, where to go on the map, and so it's Chat GPT enabled, and it's going to sync up our ops, logistics, and vendor teams so that way they can really seamless or run a show, like everything will be at your fingertip in this app. So it's Glide app. It's really cool, and it's free. So those are like my 2 things. It's like embrace technology, empower your teams to embrace technology and push them forward on it, because it really does make us smarter, faster, and more adaptable.
Terrific. Amaya, advice that you would have?
Oh yeah. So yes, that, you know, make sure you trademark your stuff. Another thing to remember, and this is something I learned early on, is in event production, okay, let's say we do Guns N' Roses concert, but then the day after it's gone and there's nothing, right? It's important to create an event name, festival name that you can grow as a little baby, you know, because that's your asset. Anything else, we just do it and then it's gone the next day, and there's no remembrance of it or anything. There's nothing to build. Sure, you made a couple $100,000, but that's it, you know? So yeah, definitely brand. You need a brand to grow, because that is your vehicle. That is something you can own and grow with. You know, I think that's my biggest advice for sure.
Jose, love to know your advice to anybody. I imagine it's probably going to be something about getting your hands dirty.
Yeah, I mean, I would come from a old school mentality and just say, as far as like, if you're going to be doing events and being in the event space and you're going to be producing events, specifically operationally, is wrap your heads around being a proactive planner, not a reactive planner. Because the majority of planning that I have come to seen is reactive. And you think just because you're advancing stuff that inherently makes it proactive, but that is not true. You really have to see all your steps all the way through and be as granular as you can. Because if you see it you see it maintained, and then you see it out, whether it's from your fence lines to your trailers to your equipment staging areas, all of the nuances. There's a lot of people that I see that are like, oh, we got 10 trailers coming in on this day. And then it's like, we'll figure it out when we get there. And it's like, no, you figure it out before you get there, because that actually reiterates into time savings and not stretching your team as much. And just because you have a talented team that can go the distance, work 18-hour days for 6 months straight, doesn't mean that that's what you want to do, nor is that really healthy or sustainable from a health standpoint. So if you really are a proactive planner, you want to think of all your steps all the way through. And you would be amazed at what that equivocates to when you're actually on site for 12 hours as opposed to 15, 18, right off the bat, and what that does for your team morale and for your efficiency, and also for having time as a buffer for the things that we can't predict. There's all the things that we can think of, but there's all those things that we don't. And then lastly, what I would say is that I've seen a lot of younger people in the industry that are coming from school, that come into management positions, but never really quite get the ground experience. So I would reiterate to everyone, if that's something that you haven't been able to witness or be a part of, try to do so. Try to learn how to drive a forklift. Try to pay attention to how long it takes to dump a truck, how long it takes to build a tent. Because how can you really plan an event truly granularly if you've never done that sort of work yourself? And a lot of people don't, and that's just the nature of the beast. And as I started as a work crew person and worked my way to where I am. So I've had a different experience. But for the younger people coming in, I would say just take the time to pay attention to those details, so then you can be aware of time management in a much more direct way, and then you can apply that to your planning.
EJ, final words on the topic before we turn it over to questions.
Well, I think that everyone has given really perfect answers, so I don't have much to add. I would just say that what I do and what our team does, and it's great, it's not getting in other people's lane, but it's a very good idea pre-festival to put on someone else's hat. For example, I want to be a food vendor. I want to be the artist that gets out of the ground transportation vehicle, and what's the first thing they're looking for? What's the first thing they're going to ask for? I want to be the artist, the crafts artisan, and what are they looking for? So I usually ask my team to take the time to imagine and put themselves literally in the position of all of these different players so that it can help them become more empathetic and more aware of what's going on. And it helps us to catch things that would possibly fall through the cracks.
Well, terrific. Thank you, panel. I want to turn it over now to our audience to see if we have any questions for these guys.
I'll bring the mic to you. Okay.
Hey, Austin. So one thing that we share in common, we are both wheelchair users. How had your festival experience been with accessibility?
Here at this event?
No.
Oh.
No, in general.
Oh, in general. I'm blessed that I've seen things radically change and been a small part in it over the last 15 years in my career. When I first started attending music festivals, simply ADA compliance just wasn't a topic on the back end of things. And many festivals just were not accessible and were not inclusive to a large segment of the population. Today, there's none of the top 100 grossing music festivals. Every single one of them have somebody who is thinking about ADA compliance in that space, and to have been a part of a lot of those conversations and seen that progress has been a great pleasure of my life, frankly speaking. And to see the industry get behind this concept and constantly ask year after year, yes, but how can we do better? How can we do better? I'm very grateful that I've got to watch that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, EJ actually has a response to that
I would
as well.
like to add to that. Is that Chris?
Yes.
Okay, I would like to add to that, Chris, just from a producer and a promoter standpoint. We've seen basically a 360 change in our staff and how they think about festivals now, because we have advocates and we've had much training so that they could, when I talked about the different roles that you come to the festival, that's absolutely one of the roles. If you come, you're coming to the festival and you're coming in a wheelchair, what are the things that you're looking for? You know, you're a VIP person. So how am I going to treat you so that you feel that you are welcome at the festival? We have Braille, we have sign language interpreters, we have portable pathways. And the thing that I found was the sticking point was the staff's concern with the budget and wondering, can we do it? Can our budget allow? And we've changed that dialogue to, it is a natural for us to do it. So now that we know we have to do it, let's just budget for it and do it. Now, there are different scenarios and levels of what we have to do, so you'll decide whether you're going to do a ramp or whether you're going to do a mechanical lift. But have your staff feel comfortable having the conversation, and I found that the budget was what kept them from having the healthy conversations.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you coming, and please, a round of applause for this panel. Thank you so much. They'll be available to you outside as we get ready for the next panel. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, thank you, guys.
You want to get a picture of all of us?
Yeah. You can pair it. You might take